guys for coming. This is the Academic Outreach and Innovation Faculty-Led Workshop put on by the LIFT Fellows. Again, thanks for the media team. They were rushing around. I forgot there wasn't a projector, so I made them run a little bit and get a workout before we got started today. Also like to note that Academic Outreach and Innovation has a brand new website, li.wsu.edu. So if there's any other suggestions for faculty-led workshops or anything way we can support or help you, that is a great resource to jumpstart. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Denise Yost, and she's going to go ahead and introduce the fabulous panel for today.
Thank you very much. Just starting with a warm welcome, thank you for attending today. We're excited about the second cohort of LIFT Fellows that's coming up this year, and it's associated with the larger Transformational Change Initiative grant. I'm going to talk a little bit about that before we get started. Several thank yous. There's also handouts available. If you're walking in, you didn't get those. If you're watching online, just contact me. I'll give you those handouts directly. Today, thank you to Academic Outreach and Innovation. They have been our partner in active learning with LIFT, always putting on high quality programs. Again, visit their website. They have a lot of videos to look at and learn from as well. Thank you to all of the panelists today. We'll have one more joining a little bit late, but thank you all for taking your time. I don't know how we got 7 panelists, so I think that's a good thing. We will see. Thank you to, again, the audience for showing up. Hopefully you're interested in LIFT. Thank you to the university and for the investment in the Transformational Change Initiative. This is a system-wide supported initiative, and it's really about impacting the student. And in the LIFT faculty training the faculty to also meet the students where they are and put in the classroom some implementations that are really evidence-based and game changers, I would say. Thank you to the co-PIs. My co-PI is on the grant, so I'm a PI. Sam Swindell is also, as is Laura Hill, and our director of the grant is Katie Forsythe. And thank you to my co-facilitator. I don't know where she went. She was just here, Mary Kay Patton, for the first round of LIFT, and also to the facilitators that are coming up, which include graduates of the LIFT program. A little bit of an overview. LIFT is the faculty development arm of the larger grant, the Transformational Change Initiative, or TCI, at WSU. It's a student-centered initiative for increasing success at WSU both individually and institutionally through supporting students' emotional, social, and academic health and well-being. Overall, the goal is to improve resiliency and empower students, positioning them for lifelong success. LIFT focuses on training faculty to adopt and adapt evidence-based methods in the classroom, no matter the discipline. So what we'll see today is a variety of disciplines and how they've implemented these approaches in the classroom with all sizes, different sizes of classrooms. We also have faculty fellows that are in Tri-Cities and Vancouver. In its first year, we trained 53 faculty. 55 started, 53 finished the program across the 3 different campuses, including Pullman, impacting, by our estimates, about 7,000 students this last fall. There are other parts of the grant, so LIFT is the faculty development component. We also have components that are focused on a college student parent handbook and a larger NIH grant. That handbook is meant to bridge students into their first year and help students talk with their parents before they come to support students in that very challenging first year of their academic career. We also have LIFT, which dovetails with curriculum development, focused on innovative pedagogy and an increased level of active engagement and collaboration across the WSU community. Launch is the student ambassadors group that from year 1 through year 4 helped students to know what the active learning and engaged practices are across campus. They also will serve as mentors and as an advisory network for high-impact learning practices across the WSU system. We also have a full research team associated with the grant. That team is wide and varied, and we will be looking at practices, we will be looking at faculty development and student development over time. This grant is aligned with the Drive to 25 in 3 main ways: through improving retention through student success, engagement through curriculum development, experiential learning, hands-on training and individualized skills development, and finally through diversity in evidence-based classroom interventions and implementations. Most recently, this last year, the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine published an article that we are really excited about, mostly because it aligned with the main things that we cover in the faculty development, pedagogy, and advancement. Interpersonal and intrapersonal competencies, bringing those to all disciplines. More information about the Transformational Change Initiative and all arms of the grant are available at connors.wsu.edu/TCI. And finally, we're going to get down to the meat and actually the exciting part. Besides me talking, the panelists today have full permission to say whatever they would like. And that's full disclosure, so get ready, it's coming. We're going to start off with the panelists just introducing themselves. We'll start at the far end with Allison. Just name, maybe department, and what classes you implemented in this last fall.
I went to School of the Environment, and I implemented in a systems modeling class as well as an environmental assessment class, which were both junior to senior level classes.
Kara Whitman in the School of the Environment. I implemented in Environmental Science 101, an entry-level non-major course.
I'm Paul Buckley from the Department of Chemistry, and I implemented in Chem 105, which is large lecture general chemistry.
My name is Joe Hiwa, and I'm with the Department of Human Development, and I implemented in a couple of courses that are professional development seminars at the senior level in human development required for all majors in our program.
I'm Anna Whitehall. I'm also in the Department of Human Development, and I implemented in 2 classes, one an entry-level HD 205 Communications and Life Skills class, and also in a junior senior level capstone class around leadership.
My name is Leanne Hunter. I'm faculty in the Department of English, and technically I implemented it in my capstone course in the senior level class in the English department, but I've actually been implementing it in all of my classes ever since I began the LIFT workshops.
Thank you. And Paul Varel will be joining us shortly. I think he's teaching. So we're going to start off with the first question, and I hope you have answers because it's really what you valued about the program. This is a great group, and so just from A to Z, what did you value about the program? And anyone can answer.
I guess I could start. For one, it gave me the background to let me know that what I was already kind of understood but didn't have the research behind it to say that what I was doing was the right way to go, and that it was a good approach to connecting more with the students. So that was really cool, and also getting to know a lot of other faculty that also feel the same way and are implementing things in their classroom and giving me ideas. I think that's what I got most out of it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed being part of the LIFT team. I thought it was amazing how some of the implementations and strategies that we read about are actually pretty simple to do. It doesn't take a heck of a lot of work on your part, and it was really interesting to read the research that shows very well how this works. I mean, there's real fruit to these endeavors. So.
Yeah, kind of similar to what the others just mentioned, what I appreciated was we learned very simple, sort of stealthy implementations and interventions that can be introduced and that improve our pedagogy and improve our teaching ability, but don't require tons of background information or a lot of training necessarily. They're fairly simple and yet have really profound results. And then the thing that I've found perhaps the most profound about going through the process was that much of what we learned about implementing into the classroom with students, things like the growth mindset, understanding that the way we think about how our brain works and how we take on information actually influences how we take on information, right? Mm-hmm. Things like social belonging, the sense to which, or the extent to which we believe we are a part of and belong in a group impacts the way we experience our involvement in that group. Those really simple concepts, and those are just 2 examples, and there were a handful of others that we went much deeper into, we experienced them as a part of the cohort as well, right? So we learned about implementing these in classrooms with our students, but we got to experience it with a group of faculty that we experienced social belonging among. And we learned about the importance of growth mindset even in our own teaching and in our own understanding of our disciplines. And I thought that was really powerful and really helped to connect the content personally, which then made it easier to implement in the classroom for our students.
Yeah, I would follow up with that. It's just this intentionality of taking the time to think about it and realize that it's these very simple behaviors that we have often with ourselves that are what our students mirror. And I found myself much happier in the class. This was my best semester. You know, it was just delightful, and I was thrilled to go to class every day. And when I would think about things that were bothering me about one or another of a student or an assignment or something like that, it would just go slip back into this intentional, you can change something right now with just a little tweak and get tremendous results.
Mine, just echoing everyone else, for me it was the critical vocabulary that I developed as a result of the LIFT training and the evidence-based approaches. And so everything aligned with what I was already doing, but now I had evidence to support it and a critical language to support it. And so even though my instinct was to play in class and create a fun social environment, I've always held back, and so recently I've been encouraging that kind of social connectedness more because now I know that the research supports it.
Thank you. So the handouts are quite detailed, as is the website, but just to give you an overview to start out here, what we're talking about is there are a series of workshops that are live face-to-face for the trainings, and so there's 4 major topics that we cover: social belonging and connectedness, values and values-based decision-making, mindfulness and self-compassion, and the last one is growth mindset and resiliency. And so those scaffold over time, and for all of those we have evidence-based approaches in the literature that we look at, that we read, that we investigate, and then we also bring that to life. So they all have had an experience of what we're talking about as well. So it's not just a dictating to you, hey, this might be a good idea. It's actually you experiencing it, so you know what that feels like in your own body, in your own mind, because you're also matching that with your own discipline and trying to figure out what is the most efficacious way I can implement this for my students. All right, number 2, what do future participants really need to know about the LIFT program?
So I remember getting an email from Sam Swindell saying, I know you're really busy and you probably don't have time to do this, but check out this opportunity, see if you're interested. And my first thought was, yes, I'm really busy, but no, this aligns exactly with what I do and what I believe in, and so how it won't feel like additional work. And I would say that in the end, it didn't feel like a massive amount of additional work, even though the checklists are a little bit overwhelming. It felt so in line with what I believe in as a teacher, and that it never, and because I knew in advance when the workshops were scheduled and whether or not it worked with my schedule, it worked out for me.
I mean, I would echo that as well, but I would also say that these little interventions that seem so simple, and all of us sat there going, you have got to be kidding me. We experienced it another, I trained a grad student to do a little system syncing exercise, and she has statistical evidence that it changed grades in her class. And we did controls. We had one lab that didn't use anything, one lab with one method, and one lab with a third method. And we sat there reviewing her thesis the other day, just going, this really can't be, but every way we looked at the data, it was very clear that this small intervention had made a huge difference. So it was pretty stunning. Believe that they can actually do that.
Thanks for raising that point. I will just add that I did mention that we have a full research team with the grant as well. And we will be, you know, assessing students and faculty and all of that in the classroom. But there is a part where you can look at particular things in your classroom as well and see if that might pair with a larger grant where we're looking at and analyzing data for those types of results. So thanks for bringing that up, Allison.
Yeah, I would say, I just want to maybe reinforce something Kara mentioned on the last question as far as something good to know. It's a really nice opportunity to engage and mingle with like-minded individuals. I think if I hadn't been part of the LIFT program, I might still be just kind of in my cubby hole and over in Fulmer thinking about things. You know, it's just nice to meet like-minded people and bounce ideas off of each other and have some very interesting discussions that I probably would not have had.
And to piggyback on that, you mentioned like-minded people. One of the things that I really appreciated too is that you have people from different disciplines and with different perspectives, and there's room for struggle in the process. There are times when, you know, maybe your perspective and it may be informed by some disciplinary background says, no, that can't work, or I don't know if I can incorporate that because that's going to be too time consuming and I have this content to scaffold and I just don't know where we can fit that in. And there's room and an openness for people to be able to sort of bring that struggle to the table and then figure out how to sort of in community determine how it's going to work in various contexts across campus. And there's no sort of agenda or one-size-fits-all approach that says everybody now has to start doing this, this, and this. It really is figuring out what is this going to look like and what's going to be supportive of the role that I have in my department teaching this content, and how can I utilize these concepts to impact that positively and not, it isn't sort of an extra add-on thing that takes away from what you're doing. And I really found that helpful. And I learned a lot from people who do come at these ideas from very different perspectives and backgrounds.
I would actually piggyback off of a lot of things that a lot of people have said about this, but I think one of the things that I experienced about it is that it does challenge me to think differently than maybe I've thought about things before. Not only for my own discipline and what I'm teaching, but for other people's too, because we do come together in community. I don't know anything about chemistry. I've never taken a chemistry class in my life. And yet I could still be in conversation with Paul about, hey, why don't you try this, or how about this? And he can tell me, no, that's not going to work. But at least I have an opportunity to challenge myself to think differently than I've thought before about something that I wouldn't get to do on a regular basis.
Great. That was a full round of what they need to know. Anything you want to add? Anything you want to add? What they need to know? Future participants. And we'll have time for questions at the end, so if you're just biting at the bit, just hold on to that question. Anything else from the panel?
One quick thing. One of the other things that I really appreciated was there are some structures built into it that are pretty cool that I think we talk about wanting to do in higher ed or in any educational capacity, and we don't do very often. So things like having, and I don't want this to scare people, but I'm just, here you go, it's real, this happens. Having a partner of sorts where you go observe another classroom and an implementation of something, and you see their teaching, and then they come observe yours, and then you get together and discuss what went well, what could have gone better. And again, I think we think that's a good idea, but I don't know about you. We never do this, right? We never actually take the time to go see somebody else's teaching or to invite somebody else to come observe us and then to offer feedback. And it was so useful. It was like, yeah, there's a reason why we talk about that being a good idea. And in other contexts, we just don't ever do it. Here it's required, and so you do. And it's not scary. I mean, these are all people that you've sort of been in the trenches with talking about this stuff, and so they're all supportive. And then you get a lot out of even that one. And there are a handful of sort of requirements, but that one in particular I'll mention and highlight. Could be scary or what, but it was really valuable, at least for me. And that was my experience.
All right. we're gonna get to the place where the rubber hits the road. So, question number 3, from your Lift workshop learning, what has been the single most important adjustment that you have made in your classes this past semester? So if you had multiple adjustments this last semester, maybe just pick one that's on top. What was the single most important adjustment that you made based off your Lift workshop learning?
I'll jump in there. For me, it was the way that I provided feedback to my students. So we have in my 200 level class, we have them do a series of reflection papers, and they always do really bad on the first one. And then they seem to get better over time, but not as good as I would like them to get by the end of the semester. And so the way that I provided feedback for my students, by approaching it in a social belonging kind of way, you're not the only person struggling with this, and growth mindset, here's the areas that you can improve, you just aren't there yet, all those kinds of feedback seem to open my students up to wanting to try to improve more than I've seen in the past. And that was a fairly easy switch on my end. I still provide feedback to my students, I always have, but the way that I provided that feedback made a big impact on how they were approaching their assignments and how open they were to receiving the feedback from me. Thank you, Anna.
I did something similar with growth mindset in starting out with, telling them, don't worry about your score if it's really poor, and give them feedback about something and say, look, all I want you to do is to be at this point by the end of the semester. I really don't care what your beginning score was, just improve throughout it. And I had a lot of them that sort of started out hesitantly with that, but I think they figured out very quickly that that was the whole point. The other thing that I emphasized continually, because these were majors in classes that are appropriate to them, this is professional development. I'm not your boss. I'm trying to get you to the point that your boss isn't going to hammer you because you're turning in work that maybe isn't up to somebody's standards. So that's just the only point of getting you from here to here, is to help you be a stronger professional. And the other thing that I did was I was quite patient with some students with late work, and figuring, you're beating yourself up. The more you have late, the more stressed out you are. And I get it, and they'd come and tell me why, and I'm like, these are all very legitimate reasons. You're stressed out, and you can't get your work in. This is our contract. You still have to get all of this done. And I had 2 students in one class right at the end of the semester. They must have done nothing else but my class for 2 weeks, because they pulled it all off. And I'm like, if you immersed yourself that well to get all of that done, and I saw you in class every day talking the talk so that I know that you were actually communicating in a verbal sense, I thought that was a pretty good success in the end, and that they grew over time with that.
A really small thing that I've changed that has a huge effect, and it was a delayed implementation too, because I just began doing it this semester, and I've been thinking about social connectedness. And so the single huge difference I've made is that every class period begins with the students in circles, and they're sharing one thing that they collected from that reading. And so I'm teaching English classes, and we're reading literature. And I have 2 classes, one of 40 students and one of 14, and you could hardly tell them apart. The amount of energy and excitement that comes out of the bonding that's happening in these groups. And I'm remembering when I first did the social connectedness and belonging workshop last spring, I was also teaching a small class of 14, and I tried to implement it right away. And I tried to have the groups form team names and identities and some sort of cohesion, and had them name themselves, right? And they came up with things like team. So it felt like a very failed attempt at the beginning, and then I'm doing it the same thing in this, in the same exact class this semester, and they launched into storytelling and all sorts of. I can tell that the energy is there, because I implemented it right from the beginning. I understand a little bit better what I'm doing, and it's a simple adjustment in terms of using these circles for discussion.
Thank you, Leanne.
you mentioned class sizes, and I'm really glad you said 40 and 14. So maybe we can just go down the row and just give an idea of the class sizes that you had this past semester, if you would.
Oh, I had, I guess in the fall, I was teaching a class of 21.
Yeah, I had 40 and 11, kind of similar.
I had 2 lecture sections of Chem 105, 250 and 350.
I had 2 sections of environmental science 101. One was about 130 and one was 80, somewhere in there.
I had a class of 25 and a class of 29.
So you can see that there's a spectrum, and that's true actually for most of them. We have class sizes for everyone, but there's a big range of class sizes as well. Okay, we're going to move on. If possible, please describe a specific example from this past semester where you noticed that your lift training was especially useful or evident. It can be anything. We had examples of things you did in class, how confident you felt teaching, noteworthy student reactions, anything like that.
So my example is building off of the one I just shared. And so it was a moment where I was in the middle of the class with these 14 students, and I realized, my lesson plan just wasn't going, it didn't make sense to launch into the regular lesson plan because there was an energy that was very different that day. And so I had a different kind of confidence than I usually do to throw it all out and set a timer for 5 minutes and have them, put their pen to the paper for 5 minutes, however they wanted, drawing or writing or whatever they, occurred to them, to respond to this really heated discussion that we'd had about learning methods in higher ed, and that's been the subject of our reading. And it ended up being a very profound, so that was maybe a normal thing I would do, a 5-minute free write or free draw. But I was surprised at how much they were willing to break the rules, and these were honors students too, and they were ready to they were scribbling and doing strange things. But really the best part, and where I saw my lift training coming into play, was then I had them get into their circles to share what they had done for those 5 minutes, and I let them go for about 15 minutes. Often talking about things off topic, right? Whereas I'm used to, facilitating group work in English classes, and they're getting off topic, so it's time to get back to the important work here. And I realized, no, they're bonding, and that's really important at this stage of the semester. So I'm just going to let them go. And they walked out of class that day with huge smiles, and it really just, I felt the connection happening. And I think, and that's definitely something that I felt more confident doing, because I said, this is evidence-based and research-based. So, so I was able to even support that with my students as well.
One thing I found really valuable, what question you were but so one of the outcomes of being in LIFT last year was we got thinking more about active learning strategies in class as well, and that's always a challenge when you have 300 people in the classroom. So we started doing concept mapping in Chem 105. So I got together with SOLA and the College of Ed, and we devised a strategy, and it was a lot of fun. We did it 4 or 5 times last semester, and students would bring in their laptops or tablets, and we were all on Qualtrics doing these concept mapping exercises, pre and post tests, and they've worked up some of the data, and they believe that there's some positive correlations with outcomes and how well they can concept map. And then we asked some questions about it on the blue course evals, and there was a big range. Some students really hated it. They just wanted to sit there and take notes. But a lot of students, we got a lot of really positive feedback about it, how it really helped them connect all these ideas together, which I think is the main hindrance to being successful in that class, is conceptual connections. So I really, really enjoyed that, and I'm going to continue doing that forever.
Thank you. Just want to introduce Paul Varel at the end. Welcome.
Thank you. I was teaching, so.
Yeah, I did say you were teaching, so you got off the hook. We're just going through some questions. Current question, not that you have to answer at this moment, but you know, how did LIFT show up in your classroom, in the way you felt about class, or what you saw in students, or something you specifically implemented? So.
I guess my big emphasis in Biology 102, which is a large enrollment non-majors class for the fall, was more on a sense of belonging, something that we talked a lot about. I have a lot of first-year students. I have a growing number of first-gen, first-year students, for whom a sense of belonging, I think, can be difficult to cultivate. And so I wanted to provide them with some opportunities to develop that, some of which we had talked about in LIFT. And so we kicked off very early in the semester with a values and goals exercise that we then repeated at the end of the semester, asking them to what extent their experiences in that first year, or first semester, had changed their values, had perhaps changed the goals they have for themselves academically, but not just academically. I didn't want to limit it to that. At the end of the semester, we had an exercise that I called Letter to a Friend, where I wanted them to reflect on the things that had worked for them, the things that hadn't worked for them, but I wanted it to be brief and stealthy, and so they didn't know what the purpose was. I told them they were doing this so that we could collect these to then show them to the next generation of Biology 102 students, which I think we will do. But really the goal was to get them to self-reflect. So those were two big things we did. In addition, something I did which I don't think everyone would feel comfortable doing was to tell my own story. My own story is checkered. I guess most of us have checkered stories. And it illustrates some of the things that we talked about. And I think that broke down some barriers, as well as perhaps making people feel a little less isolated, that there were other people around them who were or had experienced similar issues, and that you can come through it and you can be reasonably successful as a consequence of that. So they were the three big things I did. Other things too, but they were the three big ones.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, I might follow up on that. I did a similar activity last semester, a reflective writing assignment at the end of the semester, asking them to write a letter to themselves at the beginning of the semester or to another student, so they could choose how they wanted to kind of approach it and reflect on how they felt at the beginning, and tell them, like, don't, you know, a lot of them wrote things like, don't worry, it's going to get better, and, you know, a lot of those kinds of things, and these are the kind of things you're going to learn about. And so I had a lot of examples, which I then brought forward to this semester. And the first day of class, I handed out packets. I had them get into POGIL groups, because we do POGIL in this class, and I gave them each packet of these reflections from other students with the names blocked out so you can see who wrote it, and then had them discuss as a group, you know, introduce themselves, and then discuss as a group what the letter made them think about, and then they had to answer a few questions, and then they posted it on something on a Padlet as a group. So, and there was a lot of dialogue, and I had students tell me, oh, wow, I feel a little bit better about what's going to happen this semester, because, you know, we start out with some pretty more difficult concepts in class, and it can be a little scary, but I think that it did help. I don't have like evidence for that, but the anecdotal evidence from the conversations I was hearing was that it was effective. So, right.
Something else, it's kind of, well, it's somewhat related to these, but it's the intentionality of, I walked into the classroom and I told them that I'd been part of this, and that I explained what the Success Initiative was, and that WSU had invested so heavily in it, and really, really cared, and explained how many different courses these things were happening in. And there was a lot of, wow, really? And I think that made them feel like we really cared. And I've been telling, actually, I in every recruiting event that I do now with showcases, I do this as well, and it's really resonating with parents and students that WSU would invest significant funds, and I can tell them how much they invested in my RA. Well, Kara's RA, but she's my grad student. So this is significant, and I think that it also helped my students, and there's juniors and seniors, so they've been around a little bit, but it helped them understand that we really do care enough to invest in how we're approaching them. So I think that that intentionality really made a difference with a lot of respect and growth in the classroom.
Thank you. I can add a personal note on that one because one of the TAs in my class is actually a student ambassador in the launch program, and when we're talking about it and they're learning about what we're doing, they're actually a senior, and so still wanting to be part of what's happening now. And man, I wish this was happening when I was a freshman. And so I think they're excited to see about, see the evolution and feel and be a part of it. So thank you for sharing that. Other classroom examples, evidence you want to share about LIFT? This is your chance because the next one's a personal question, so even more personal. Okay. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I've got a couple. So I've started implementing a number of the things that we learned about in class, in my classes. A couple of ways that I've seen some of that stand out. So one, and we actually went through this last spring, right? And then we sort of officially implemented it in the fall. But as I'm sure is the case with many, we started, as soon as we learned about it, we just went and started implementing stuff right away. And so I remember in the spring, putting out a number of the interventions that we had discussed in LIFT into my classes. And then I heard from a student in the summer who began work with the Peace Corps, who went through a 2-week training, and after that emailed to say, we just went through this training, and they went through and had us learn about 7 or 8 different things that we just went through in your class, and it was so cool to feel like I already had been introduced to this stuff, and almost all of the things that they mentioned, and they sort of highlighted them all specifically, were directly the things that came out of LIFT, right? I also asked my students at the end of every semester to highlight the one area from the course where they gained the most, they learned and were able to implement and utilize what they had learned the most in their lives, in any capacity, academically or otherwise. And again, the answers vary quite broadly, and they learn a lot of different things that aren't specifically LIFT oriented in the course. But the one that came out the most over and over and over again was the growth mindset concept, that which is one of the the main components of LIFT. And they discussed ways that they were implementing and sort of utilizing that mindset and that way of thinking in all sorts of different aspects of their lives, not just the course content that I sort of brought it into with our class, but also how they were then utilizing it in relationships with friends and family, in their work, and their different aspects of their lives outside of the classroom, which I thought was pretty powerful and a good reminder that these things make an impact that go beyond just the grades in our classes and what's happening in the specific courses where they're introduced. They're impacting their entire lives, and the students really are soaking this stuff up and taking it with them into other aspects of life.
Thank you. All right, so moving forward, beyond the classroom, it's a great segue. Did the LIFT program inspire you personally to make any changes? And if so, would you please describe whichever you would like to share, willing to share?
Well, I love the idea of growth mindset. I think out of the 4 areas we talked about, that was my favorite. So I just like, I try to tell my students, you can get smarter if you apply yourself. I try and keep that in the back of my head too. I don't know if it works, but for me, but yeah, I mean that's and like self-compassion, giving yourself a break when you screw up, things go wrong. So I don't think I can point to anyone like monumental instance, but I carry a lot of those ideas with me in my head every day, and think back about them and try to apply them to myself.
Thank you.
For me, the Self-Compassion Workshop was transformational, and I remember being very moved to, and Ann Cox, I believe, was leading that segment of the workshop. And this idea that that I don't speak to myself the same way that I would speak to my best friend if my best friend screwed up, or someone that I loved or cared about, and why wasn't I treating myself that kindly? I ended up forming a really strong bond with Ann Cox, and also with other components of just my own personal development, and some of the reading that I did last summer in terms of, finding your inner mentor, and those things were fundamentally transformational for me as a human being, and ended up coming back into some of the work that I do when I mentor students.
Yeah, I would expand on that. The growth mindset and self-compassion that I had been trying to talk with my students about, rushing into class feeling hectic or feeling like I should have spent a lot more time preparing, because I shifted the responsibility of what they did in class to them and say, take it as far as you can each day, and if you struggle, it's okay. There were times, when we all run in there and we go, oh my gosh, or you're distracted by something or else, that as soon as I'd walk in, I would just completely relax, because I knew it was going to be okay. Because they would pick up, and I could say, look, sorry, I'm coming in frazzled, and they're like, oh, that's okay. And we would pick up as a group together, and it really became a community, sort of self-generative sort of thing. And I think that it helped the community in the classroom, and in such a way that we all relaxed. And if somebody was obviously being sort of quiet or depressed or distracted one day or another, the same thing I think happened with other students. So it was very subtle, but throughout the semester I kept noticing that, man, I just loved going to class. It made thinking about the things that I need to do in class so much more efficient, because I was relaxed and my mind was working more effectively. And so we had this back and forth, I think, relationship that was, unspoken in class, that helped us all, I think, relax in class, to the point that my class in Spark, we were always getting thrown out of, because we would just keep working. And then AMS would come on for the next class. We were like, oh, we've got to get out of here. And nobody would ever start packing up early or try to leave or get distracted. People would work until literally we were thrown out of the classroom. So it made it fun for all of us.
Thank you.
I think probably like many of us, I spend a lot of my time busy doing things without necessarily thinking about what I'm doing. And I think the values and goals exercise made me think, well, what are my values? What are my goals professionally, but also personally? And I'm not sure I'd been thinking along those lines too much before. And I think that's been good for me.
I can add another one unless someone wants one. I was thinking that another change, I've always practiced some meditation and mindfulness, but it's something that I let kind of go. And I recently reintroduced it into my day, a 10-minute mindfulness practice before I have something major to do, like teaching. And I've realized, like, now I don't think I ever want to teach without doing a 10-minute mindfulness activity, because it helps me center so incredibly much and become intentional. And even though I know I have more prep to do in those 10 minutes, it's actually, everything comes into focus. And what are my big goals for this, the class period? Even though I'm not supposed to be thinking about those things while I'm being mindful, but it sort of is this freeing moment and intentionality that I don't normally fit into my day.
Anything else? All right. Okay, so we're gonna maybe just pause and just check and see if there's any questions from out there online at all, or any questions in the room. We'll take a couple questions in the room if you have them at this moment. Just pause for a minute. Any questions for the panel? Yes, please.
So
That's a great question. So the question is, can these concepts be applied to a non-face-to-face environment, so hybrid or online? Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Well, we have online homework in my class, and I actually think it was the big football game last fall. We decided not to have class, but I wanted to give them some assignment, and so I made an online assignment, and it was on growth mindset. So I posted some videos and posted about 10 questions they had to answer, and the questions were just basic. Is this characteristic evidence of growth mindset or fixed mindset? So it was very easy to engage them online in an intervention like that.
Yeah, one of the, I guess, main changes that I've made that I think has been most helpful in one of my courses that is not one of the ones that I mentioned, where specifically we were working on making the implementations, the interventions, is an online course that I teach, and it in terms of the curriculum, it follows the course where I'm focusing on making adjustments. And so in that next course, they're online and they are dispersed all around the state and all around the region doing field placement experiences. And in that course, I transformed a couple of the assignments. One was a sort of midway through the term reflection of sorts, kind of asked a series of questions about how they're seeing their learning throughout their curriculum in our program implemented into their course. And I changed that to model the right to a student who is earlier in the program, which is an intervention that gets at this idea of social belonging and connectedness, so that we see ourselves as a part of this larger group of professionals in this area. And that really transformed the type of responses that I got, the type of papers. They were, even though it was a less formal approach to the paper, they're now writing letters, they're writing to peers, and I encourage them to do it in that way. They have been writing with much more depth and insight to their own experience and to their own learning than they had been before. Very simple shift, still asking them to reflect on the same types of things, but do it in a different way, and incorporates some of the learning from the program in, I think, some pretty powerful ways. Another one is that I've shifted the way that I utilize some of the sort of discussion posts and contact with other students in the online environment to try to incorporate some of the concepts that we learned in LIFT that I think have been very beneficial as well. So absolutely, I do think that you can apply these concepts in those contexts for pretty significant results.
Thank you. Does that help?
Can I follow up?
Sure.
So, what proportion of whatever you learned in this program can you apply to online? Like, is it like some of them, or can you apply almost everything in an online environment?
So the question is, how much of the program can you apply in the online environment? Just some, or can you do it all? Can you apply it all?
I would say you can apply it all.
Yeah, I can't think of anything you would.
Yeah. One of the classes that I've been implementing in, not officially, but on the side, by 200 level class, we teach purely online, and everything that we do in an in-class face-to-face environment, we do on the online class too. So it might shift a little bit. It might be through discussion post versus through a group conversation in class or something like that, but all of the concepts we covered in LIFT are covered in that class, and it's all done online.
What I'm learning in this moment is that they've learned brief and stealthy so well, they're all implementing on the side. So we need to ask, what side courses are you also implementing in, besides the main courses?
Sneaking into every class, I think.
Okay. Okay, so we've heard a lot of ways that students have responded. So several of you have mentioned how students have responded to changes in the classroom. You can add to that if you'd like. The second question here is, what techniques have you used that best reach the learner in your opinion? And I would just add, maybe in this moment, if there's technology involved, if you could illuminate that for those watching.
So an assignment that I officially implemented last semester in my 400 level class that I had kind of inadvertently done previous semesters, and this semester, last semester, I made it an absolute 100% required assignment for the class, was using a tool called Satori. And Satori is an online kind of way to build a timeline where students can go in and put in pictures and videos and their own text and all kinds of different things to highlight whatever it is you want them to highlight. So it could be a timeline if you're talking about history, it could be concept mapping in a way, it can be used lots of different ways. But in my particular assignment, I did this one called, I'm teaching a leadership course, so I did a leadership timeline, and I asked them to reflect on times in their own lives where they have been leaders and connect it to course material that we've been talking about. And I had done it kind of before. I said I'd done it inadvertently. It hadn't been an assignment. And last semester I did it, and all 20 students created a timeline and shared it with the whole class. And their response to this was over the top. Like the first day we got through maybe 4 people because they just wanted to share so much information about their own experiences and how it connected to other people in the class. And I've never had a class where 20 people did not get on their own phones or anything ever the entire time, because they were just like this with their peers, just like, oh my gosh. And somebody would say something, be like, oh yeah, I've done that too, or whatever it was. And the shift in the environment in the room after we shared those was amazing. Like they would come in and I couldn't get them to stop talking to start class, or they would like find little groups to sit with because they had this one thing in common from the sharing of these timelines. So the social belonging piece that they felt with each other was way more than I thought I would ever be able to create. So, thanks, Hannah. Yeah.
Yeah, so for me, I use a lot of technology in my class, and I'm trying to embrace that. I mean, they're on their phones all the time anyways. Why don't we embrace technology and utilize it? I mean, I've had some failures too here and there, but I just used Satori last week, actually, for a timeline in my climate change class that they all collaboratively built together. So it's a huge timeline now with all this information that they can go back and learn from. But they really enjoyed it, and it's a fun thing to use. So it's a good way to get them engaged in a different kind of way. And I also use a program called Padlet where they can live post at the same time. And it can be anonymous, or you can make it not anonymous depending on your class. But that's a nice way to have them give you some quick feedback that if they're not comfortable saying it out loud, they can maybe post it and no one will know who said it. But so that's pretty cool.
One thing we did with Biology 102 in the fall, I've done it with other classes too, was to incorporate a service learning component. Obviously, for a class of, as it was, 600 people, we can't find biology-related projects for all of them. So we essentially said to them, hey, you find a project that fits your goals, your values, your interests. If it's biology-related, science-related, that's fine. If it's not, that's fine too. Your non-majors, you have lots of different interests. And the goal among others, or one goal among others, was to, again, foster that sense of community and belonging and connection. And we were quite explicit in asking them, do you think your experience had any role to play in that? And the responses, and I shouldn't be surprised because when we've done these things before, they've always been positive, but they were almost unanimously positive. So I think where it makes sense, where it's logistically possible, to have a service learning component can be very valuable, and not just in terms of course content.
Thank you.
All right. What surprised you most or was unexpected in your learning through the LIFT program? Full permission. What was unexpected or what surprised you in your learning? Or post-learning?
So at the time, during the workshops, I didn't always feel like I was learning anything new. I already knew this, or it all felt very familiar, or I wanted more, or there just wasn't enough, or, and I think, and I thought, well, did this actually have an impact on me? And it's not until now, a year later, that I realize wow, actually, no, this has transformed how I feel in the classroom as a teacher, and I didn't expect it to have that delayed effect that I know learning has, and I'm delighted.
Well, and just reading through all the literature you had us read, I was surprised at the results that clearly stated and showed that there is a very positive, repeatable effect here, and that this is really evidence-based practice. And I kind of had to let go of the idea of, well, how does it work? What's the mechanism? You know, as a physical scientist, we always want to know what's the causation, you know, what's the chain of events. But once I decided to just let that go, I thought it was just really amazing. Little things like sharing a birthday, or even just thinking you share a birthday, you know, with someone else is going to have some positive impact somewhere down the line.
What was unexpected or surprised you?
I think for me, one of the things that surprised me the most was after I would read about a concept or go to one of the trainings, I would see it everywhere in my life that I had not seen it before. I'd be like somewhere, I'd be like, oh my gosh, that was social belonging. I remember at the time when we were doing all of this, I was having some back injury problems and was going to physical therapy a lot, like 3 times a week. And the very first time I met with my physical therapist, she said something to me. I can't even remember what it was, but she said something to me along the lines of, you're not the only person who's had a back injury like this, and this is what we do to like do it. And I went back to the office and I told Mary Kay, my physical therapist was using social belonging. Like, she probably had no idea, but she was doing it. And so it surprised me how much I saw it arise in other aspects of my life where I would have never been that hyper aware about it before this.
Yeah, I was surprised at how much it was easy for me to incorporate all these things, even though at first it's like, well, how am I even going to do that? And that seems so overt, and I'm teaching a science class, and how am I going to do this? But it's surprisingly, well, maybe not surprisingly, but my last semester was my best semester teaching ever, I felt. I just felt more confident, and I felt like it was okay to make some mistakes, and I don't know, just my whole approach changed, and it paid off. I mean, the students were happy, and they learned a lot, and the test scores went up, and you know, so same material, just different approaches changes the outcome. So
I think one thing that surprised me was just changing my own, you know, thought about how I am approaching something became so obviously infectious in my classrooms. And you know, I think I mentioned before, the sense of community in those classes was amazing, and it happened very, very quickly. And we do group work basically every day in each of those classes, and they became extremely strong groups. I had one woman who, you know, had trouble making it to a 9 o'clock class, kept having trouble, and finally her group mate said, you will be here, and if she wasn't there, man, she's on the phone. You get here now. She got her boyfriend to get her there. So then I ran into her walking into a chemistry class. She's like, it's chemistry. I can't do chemistry. And I said, well, you told me you couldn't build models. So it was a computer modeling class where we're using a lot of algebra. You told me you couldn't do that too. If you can do algebra, you can do chemistry. You're right. And she ran into chemistry and she says, my process is in place. It's a 9 o'clock class. I will be here. And so, you know, that, to see it sort of spread out of the classroom, but the support system that had been built within that classroom for her, she's now following through her college career. So that was pretty exciting.
One thing that, and I don't know, I probably should just keep my mouth shut and not highlight this, but
It's open, Joe. Go.
But one thing that
Film is rolling.
yeah, one thing that surprised me, I knew going in, even reading through that I was going to be very eager to implement all of these things. I'm excited about them. I sort of was already bought in. And yet, one session in particular, I found myself very resistant to, leading up to it, going through it, following up and trying to implement it, and I don't want to give anything away, for new people coming in. I'll tell the topic, but in terms of sort of like how it's done, it's a really cool experience too. The one that I feel maybe had the most potential for, real profound impact going through the experience itself. It was mindfulness and self-compassion, and I just was so uncomfortable with a lot of what we were talking about, and even trying to picture putting it in the classroom. It felt a little hokey, or I don't know, and I'm just being honest, and I was surprised by it, to be honest, because I thought, even that topic, yeah, I'm bought in, and then I got into it and was like, I'm not. I don't do this, I don't want to do this, I don't know how to do this. And since then, you mentioned this sort of like a year later, things start to, it's very, very slow, and I'm still resistant, but it has been an ongoing growth process for me. And I've actually tried to come at my resistance in that topic with some of the ideas in the other concepts, right? Like growth mindset. I'm sort of thinking, okay, just because it doesn't come quickly or easily doesn't mean I need to give up. I just need to keep sort of staying present to this. And so I've implemented a few variations of mindfulness into the classroom, things that feel like it's comfortable enough for me that I don't know, anyway. And those have actually been very well received by students, and they've been good. And then now I'm really working on trying to implement some of these concepts into my own life, actually trying to be mindful and trying to take time and create some space, and I'm doing very well. So I guess one thing I would say is you don't have to be 100% bought into everything. I'm still kind of getting comfortable with even some of the concepts that we've been introduced to, and I was surprised by that, but it's a work in progress.
Thank you. Any other comments along the lines of surprising or unexpected? Okay. At this point, I'm going to open it up for questions, if we have questions from folks remotely or in the room, and also anything that you would add along the way that would be important for them to know, including Joe's last comment. Certainly, I will say one of the greatest pleasures in co-leading this was learning. Was learning and experiencing a group of faculty that were willing to learn. There are no have-tos in implementing all of the different kind of concept areas into the classroom. There are requirements that are well articulated, and you can look at those on the handouts and or online, but there are no have-tos in how you have to do it or any of that. It's really a co-exploration, I would say. And we learned a lot just putting all the materials together, doing the readings together, and that will continue to advance. We'll be bringing in new things each time. The grant is a 5-year grant. We're in the 2nd year of that grant, and so we can anticipate that the cohorts will roll forward. The other thing I'll mention right now is that the cohorts, as they go forward, there's a lot of people interested in mentoring. So if you're a LIFT fellow this round, maybe you can pair with a LIFT fellow that has gone through this already and go see what they do in the classroom. Have them, invite them to your classroom. And so the approach that we take is very much an exciting and exploratory one. I hope you heard that many times here today. And so we'll just open it up now to questions you have, and or if you have anything else to add from any of the panelists, feel free. Questions? You can ask the real ones. Anything you want to ask them. Yes?
I was wondering, how big is the cohort?
How big is the cohort? I can answer that one. So in Pullman, we had, I can answer it now, I have to recall the numbers. In Pullman, we had about 30 faculty. And then for Tri-Cities and Vancouver, they did their training together. So we had 15 from Tri-Cities and 10 from Vancouver.
And just to comment on that, I think something that was uneasy for me, and probably something that the LIFT team are addressing, I always felt like there were too many of us, right? Or that there wasn't enough time or opportunity to actually do the social connectedness and belonging. And so I'm sort of looking back with a little bit of sadness, wishing that we had done more together. Sometimes it felt like we were very task-oriented, and so working really well with a partner, and I have lots of recollections of working with individual people, but I kind of wish there'd been more opportunity for more of this sort of group circle bonding, that I think we're communicating that we feel that, but I feel like actually in the moment I always felt like I was in a large room of lots of people with a lot of work to do. My one criticism.
Thank you, and so I'll speak to that a little bit. So in Pullman, in our first go-round, which was also, thank you all for participating in our first go-round as well. It was a learning experience all around. But as we piloted that, we did 4 different workshops. So each of the 4 themes that I kind of named up front, those topic areas, we had 2-hour sets on each of those, and they were spread out one at a time, like over a couple months. And then we went to Tri-Cities, and that model was different there. The implementation model for us, training faculty, was different because we're remote. And so we did a 2-day intensive. So we had 4 topics in 2 days. And the time frame wasn't different. I mean, we did a morning set and an afternoon set, and then a morning set, afternoon set for the 4 topics. But it was different in the level of engagement, right? It's like this immersion process. So for Pullman this year, and you'll see this in the details, there's 1 day where we will cover topics 1 and 2, and then a month later, another day, which is topics 3 and 4. So they're all kind of like a day long. So that's one adjustment we've made. Other questions? Yeah, in the corner.
I'm curious to hear impressions, not hard data, about DFW rates as a result of some of the things that fellows have been doing in their classes, particularly some of the larger classes that are primarily geared towards first and second year students.
Okay, so just to recap the question, interested in impressions, maybe not hard data, about DFW rates in the classes that have a lot of students, including first and second year students.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I want to believe that what we're doing is going to help improve the DFW rates, because that's in many ways the name of the game that we've got to do now. I honestly think that the things that we're doing will help. I kind of take heart that maybe it may not even be a benefit in my class. I mean, maybe some of the things that we do aren't going to show up in my class. Yeah. It might be a year later in someone else's class. And that helps me a lot to think about it that way. I did get a lot of positive feedback about the concept mapping interventions. A lot of the other things that I like to do are just kind of on the fly, so I don't have hard data. I know that's not what you're interested in, but it's kind of hard to get a sense of that kind of thing when there's 300 people in the room. I think it's easier to have a sense of how it's working when there's 20 or 30 people. But
yeah, I need to look at my data.
Yeah.
And look at how many failed the previous semester and then that one. But my sense is that there were a lot less. And I don't know if it was just a reflection on my total approach to my teaching was different last semester. But
right.
I know that my grades shifted to a higher, like everyone was just a little bit higher last semester. but it's only one semester's worth of
Right.
evidence, so I don't know for sure, but it feels like to me that it has gotten better, and I'm hoping that that carries forward to other classes for these students.
And in general chem, we're kind of using the kitchen sink model. So we're just throwing everything at POGIL and concept mapping and lift interventions. And so people are like, well, you should only change one variable at a time. And I'm like, it'll take 30 years to parse through that data, you know.
Which thing is it that's doing it?
Yeah, right.
There's so many things.
But yeah, I think if nothing else, it enhances the student's experience. I think it's a heck of a lot better than the same old stuff that's been done for a long time.
We did see a shift in DFW rates in Biology 102, and we quantified it. I haven't done any statistics or anything yet, but we certainly had fewer of them. Yes, we did the interventions. Were some interventions more successful than others? Well, we don't know because we did them all at once. The other thing is, I'm always a little bit skeptical of these, I compare one semester with another semester type studies.
Yeah.
Sure.
The students are very different. I wanted the interventions to work. Is that why I found a difference? What I would like to see is something a little more experimental, which is what we actually did with the service learning component. And what we'd like to do is follow, well, what we will do, we have some support from the Provost's office, is to actually follow those students longitudinally into the future to find out if those experiences have a longer term impact. And actually to divide that by, for example, first gen versus non-first gen, to see whether the effects might be more subtle.
I'll add that this is where it takes, everyone who's interested and invested, and I really appreciate the question, because ultimately that is the goal, right? To retain students and to help them build resiliency and to help them have the skills, not only within this college career, but to step out with skills that make the difference for them, whatever that is. So it's not just in the one classroom, and I think that's part of our approach in the larger grant. Like I said, this is one aspect of the grant. And we have, strong legs to stand on in different areas. And I would say that the different interventions across classrooms, at WSU, on multiple campuses, we're hoping that over time, and we are tracking those things over time. We are tracking students, we're tracking faculty who implement, we're tracking how many times students have been in a Lift Fellows classroom, whether that's they've been in biology, now they're in a writing class, and so you can imagine dose over time is important as well. So we're looking at a lot of large questions, and looking forward to the answers, because I would love to think that, if Paul is willing to share his personal story in his classroom, that students in that classroom feel more connected to their professor and have that sense of belonging at WSU, which is part of the student experience, feeling like you have a place to belong. As a community, we just came through a difficult week. Losing a student, and I think students anchor into, this is life, these are real life experiences, and I want to feel connected to and know that I'm cared for, and whatever that looks like in different classrooms, and it looks all kinds of ways, which is also why this is not a prescription, right? It's not do it this way, it's can we come together as a community and think of ways to do this across the curriculum. So, thank you. Other questions or comments? Yes? Thank you so much for that. Yeah, thanks for that comment.
I'd follow up with something on that. When we were struggling, I was struggling with how could these little interventions make such a big deal, and on reflecting upon it, I thought about myself and talked with other people about how one small comment with a funny maybe expression that had nothing to do to you completely changed your life because it crushed you. And we think about these moments. Why can't we think about the fact that that one little thing, that extra connection, that extra smile, that extra little bit of compassion with the person cannot have the same transformation? Because we're always looking sort of for the negative part. And that's what I found in my classrooms, where it was so generative that the entire learning community shifted dramatically. And so I think that they will carry on. I know one student's carrying into chemistry, which is, she's told me that. So it is working, but a slightly different, we had two different sets of interventions from grad students. One was in Kara's class, working on a sense of place within the community of Pullman and what an intervention on a stream restoration project did. And she followed some very strict statistical protocol, and it is overwhelmingly compelling that that intervention changed their sense of place and community. And then we had this second very short intervention in a geology class that some of these concept mapping exercises completely changed the grade structure of the poorest performing students in the class. And these are so subtle, and you know, we sit there and we say we don't want to believe them, but in a generative fashion, they can make profound changes. And trying to measure them and saying, it was that one thing, that's the problem. We have to say, we're just going to do that one thing and everything will be great. We need it to be all of us doing this, and it will become generative. I'm completely confident in that. And not looking for silver bullets, but looking to change how we approach people in our community.
Any last questions? Feeling like that's a fantastic place to sort of wrap. And you know, when we came up with the name LIFT, we had several iterations. But learn, inspire, foster, transform. Lift, and sometimes we joke about the lift, that it really is like it's a lift, and it is work, and yet, you know, it's also a community lift, and it's something that can lift our students, it can lift us in our approach to teaching, it can lift the community and have that transformative effect. So if you're interested in the program, please apply. It's online. If you have any questions, you can email me directly at yost@wsu.edu. Katie Forsythe is our director. You can also find her online. Sam Swindell, Laura Hill are the other PIs. You can contact any of us any way you'd like. If you know people that aren't here today that you would really like to share this with, this is being recorded, so they can certainly watch this for themselves. And if you have any other questions between now and the deadline for applications is February 9th, let us know. And with that, thank you very much for attending. Have a wonderful evening. Rebecca has a comment.
So I'm just checking really quickly because I got an email this morning from the Todd Mordhorst in the Provost's office, and they have put together a website that focuses on opportunities, grant funding, internal grant funding around teaching. So lists the LIFT information, lists the teaching fellows information, which is also now out and open, the Smith Teaching and Learning Grant. So I was gonna see if I could find what that site is, because you might all be faculty funding opportunities. It's provost.wsu.edu/teaching/funding-opportunities. So from the Provost site, you should be able to find it, and it lists a number of things that you might all find interesting.
Okay, really, we're done now. We'll hang around and answer any questions that you might have. The panelists don't have to hang around if you don't want to, but you can. And we'll be here for a few more minutes. So thank you for attending. Have a great semester.